it's just as if it's like, because you grew up here and because everyone thinks that life is so magical. What problems could you have?
Right.
It kind of plays a part into the strictness of it. And then also like that, you have to go to school, get good grades because your parents didn't come here for you to not make money and be rich.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Welcome if you're new. I hope you're having a fantastic day and I hope your holidays are going great, whatever you celebrate. So for today's video, I interviewed Julia, who is a first-generation American. So we talked about what it was like growing up a child of immigrants. We also talked about differences in culture growing up. We talked about her family history of immigration. We talked about mental health and her experience with immigration. Honestly, this interview was flowing so incredibly naturally and so well. Julia is extremely vibrant and also well-spoken, so I really enjoyed doing this one, like I do with every interview. So I hope that you like this one and check out all the other interviews in the playlist so far. And again, just to remind you guys, if you would like to share your story, which I think you should, you can reach out to me at formself.international@gmail.com. So with that being said, I hope you enjoyed today's interview and let's jump right into it. Hi Julia, thank you so much for joining me in this interview. I'm very excited to get to know you, get to know your story. So if you want to just start by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about your background.
Yeah. So hi, I'm Julia. So I currently live in Philly and I've lived in Philly like most of my life. I moved here when I was 4 from New York. I was originally born in Buffalo, New York to immigrant parents. Both of my parents were both born in Leon in West Africa. I'm first generation born, so I'm the first of my siblings to be born here. But yeah.
So that was actually my next question. I wanted to ask if you were born here or if you were brought here by your parents, but it looks like you were born here. And how soon after your parents immigrated were you born here?
Funny story. So I actually have older parents because both of my parents literally had whole separate lives before I ever existed. So my dad came here, I want to say in the 70s, and then my mom came here in the 80s. So when my dad first came here in the 70s, he had his first family. And then same thing with my mom. She also had her own family. So I would say with my dad, it was about 20 something years after he moved here before I was born. And then my mom, it was around 15-ish years before I was born.
Yeah, wow. So they were pretty well established. And how many siblings do you have?
So I have 2 older brothers, one on my dad's side who was born abroad and one on my mother's side who was also born abroad.
So can you share, if you know, what was basically the reason for your parents, each of them immigrating to the US? Was it for school, for work, whatever?
Okay, so I'll start with my dad. So my dad, since he came here earlier, he came in the 70s. He immigrated, I believe, for school, if I remember correctly. So back in the day, in the 70s, obviously immigration has changed since then, like the plus years. So he originally came for school, and I believe he got some scholarship or something to be able to come to school for university specifically. So he was able to come, he was able to get his visa, he married an American woman, got his green card, all of that fun stuff. But I don't think he got his green card via marriage. I think he got it via school and work. My mom, on the other hand, she had her first husband in Sierra Leone, and then she met her second husband after she moved here. And then after she moved here and got married, then she got her green card and then eventually got her citizenship. And then the third marriage was with my dad, and my dad's second marriage was with my mom. Yeah, so that's kind of how they came. So my dad came for schooling. He went to school. He got his bachelor's degree in economics. He did the accounting thing for a little bit, and then he decided to become a priest. So he went and got his master's of divinity and became an Episcopalian priest. And then my mom, she came on more so on the marriage side, was just kind of working, like nannying, just a lot of jobs that, you don't really know anyone. So you're just kind of working to work. So she was like doing nannying, working in a hotel, like cleaning, different things like that. And then right after I was born, I think she decided to go to nursing school. So he went to nursing school.
And you said they're both from Leon?
Both of my parents were born in Sierra Leone. My dad was born, but he's actually from the Gambia in West Africa. So he was just born there, but he's like Gambian. My mom was born in Freetown and like lived and was raised there.
If you know, could you share if your parents have ever told you or shared with you about the differences that they are seeing in, I guess, the entire immigration experience when they were immigrating in the 70s and 80s and now?
I can more so speak on my mom's side than my dad's side, just because my dad passed away a few years ago. So I've been able to talk to my mom about my current immigration process as opposed to her. And she's like shooketh. Sometimes I'll tell my mom like, oh, I'm filing for my husband to come. And I'll be like, yeah, it's at least a year just for step one. And she's like, what? I had no idea. I thought it was just like a couple months, because back in the 70s and 80s, it was a lot easier. It was a couple months. I mean, my mom was able to bring her cousins, her brothers, her sisters, aunts, uncles, so many people over. Now it's like a years long process. So I think that's like the biggest difference there. And even on my dad's side, at least the stories that he used to tell me was that, it used to, for him, again, it was a simple process. It was a quick, like, back in the day, visas and all of that weren't so hard to come by as they are now. So my parents definitely had it easy immigrating here as opposed to my current immigration process.
And where are you trying to bring your husband from?
So my husband is currently in Greece. So he was born and raised in Greece and currently lives there.
So do you think that, I know this is kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but I'm just interested. I don't want to forget this, but do you think that your attitude towards having an international marriage and also going through the whole immigration process, do you think it was affected in any way by having immigrant parents?
Probably, I would think so. And I say that only because my parents have taken me everywhere. So like I've been back home to Sierra Leone, I've been to the Gambia before. And because my parents are international, like they travel a lot and they kind of instilled that whole traveling in me. And I feel like it was fate for me to also have an international husband. Just because like I've spent so much time traveling in Europe and Africa and just kind of all over. So I would definitely say that there's an influence there.
How was your mom's, I don't know if your dad ever met your husband, but how was their, attitude towards you having to go through this process and having an international relationship? Do you think that they were more open to this because they themselves had this experience compared to maybe parents of your friends or other relatives? So
unfortunately, my dad never met my husband, but actually, because of the pandemic, my mother has also never met my husband. But yeah, I think because at least on my mom's side, because my mom is international, she knows the whole immigration process. She was just like, it's going to take some time. So I'm 100% for it. But my friends, they were also for it too. But there's also a little bit of skepticism there too, especially with shows like, 90 Day Fiance and all of that. So it's their first thought, and of course it's always out of love because, they do love me. It was like, are you sure that this person like actually wants to immigrate because he wants to be with you or because he just wants to come to America? Right. You know what I mean? So on my parents' side, or on my mom's side, she was a lot more understanding about it. My friends, as they got to know him a little bit more and actually getting to speak with him, it's like, okay, now we see that he actually does love me. And it's not just like a whole 90 Day Fiance type thing,
Yeah. Yeah, I think at first people definitely tend to be a little bit, let's say, careful, sometimes even prejudiced around relationships like this, just because of, like you said, what we see in media, and there are unfortunately a lot of fraud cases out there. That's why we have to provide so much evidence and, turn yourself inside out just to prove that you are legitimate. But at the same time, like if you think about a relationship, you can only maintain it long distance for so long. Like eventually one of you will have to pick where to stay and where to live to continue to have a family and stuff. What do you think was the most difficult part for your parents when they were immigrating?
I guess would just be, and I guess this is also kind of the same thing with my husband too. It's just like literally uprooting your entire existence, like everything, everything you thought you knew and could have known, and just moving someplace else. I think it's been the hardest part. Luckily, both of my parents knew and spoke English, so that the language barrier wasn't too much of an issue. But definitely, I mean, if you ever spoke to other my parents, a lot of people say they have an accent. I personally don't hear it. But I guess I think, like I said, English wasn't necessarily the hard part, but I guess more so trying to understand their accent might have been a little difficult. And then just like the whole cultural shift too, so like living in West Africa is nothing like living in Northeast America, like living in the Northeast, So I guess just trying to get over those hurdles. And luckily, both of my parents are like self-starters. So it wasn't like, yes, of course, it's completely difficult to like move and like change your lives and everything. But luckily, they kind of had a little bit of that resilience also to be able to do that. So
have they ever talked about any regrets that they have had about immigrating and changing their lives? Have they ever expressed wanting to move back, or were they completely satisfied with their decision?
I would definitely say they're satisfied. At least my dad was before he passed away. He was content. He was perfectly happy living here. And I would say the same thing with my mom too. The only thing I will say, when you live in this great country of ours in America, life is very expensive. So actually what my mom did, so my mom actually retired a couple of years ago. And what she did was all of her retirement money and savings and all of that, she's just like living between here and back home in Sierra Leone. So she's actually here currently right now, and she'll be going back to Sierra Leone in January. So what she does is she spends like half her time back home in Sierra Leone because it's just so cheap to live there. Yeah. And then a quarter of her time in America, and then a quarter of her time in Europe. And that's kind of the same thing. Like, had my dad been alive too, they would have been together doing the exact same thing. Yeah. They definitely loved it. I mean, every time my mom comes back, she's just like, thank God for my American life, you're used to. But honestly, if not for anything, it's just the cost of living difference is the reason why my mom doesn't like live here full time.
It's like the cost of living and also the cost of comfort. Definitely when I go back, I noticed that we have a pretty comfortable life here. You have Amazon at your doorstep, and even when we were going through the quarantine times, I know people were definitely panicking about bread and milk and toilet paper, but everybody still had that feeling of like, yes, but next week when I go back, everything is going to be restocked again, and I'll be able to, or I can drive around and I can find what I need at a different store. And I think a lot of countries just don't have that.
Like even simple things. So like my mom had to purchase a generator for her house because in where she lives, sometimes electricity just goes, just like, it's like midday at like 3:30 in the afternoon, your electricity is gone. Right. Now, mind you, these United States, that doesn't usually happen too often. If it does, I'm calling the electric company to figure out where's my electricity. Yeah, it's like those little things that you think don't really make a difference, but kind of sort of do make a difference. So
talk a little bit about your childhood now. I really want to get to know more about yourself. Growing up as a child of immigrants, when did you become aware as a kid that you are a little bit different than everybody else, that you're actually a child of immigrants? Like, when did you become aware of the word immigrant, and if you did as a kid at all?
I kind of always knew that my parents weren't born here, just because my family just as a whole, like we're always with family, and like my uncles and aunts all kind of sort of live, a couple of them live nearby and a few of them live kind of far out. But I think kind of just my earliest memory is just always having like as crazy as this sounds, but Africans, we love to party. But like going to African parties as a child, like it's always like this crazy trip that a lot of people don't realize that like we always do is like you're like a child at these African parties and like just listening to African music and eating African food, like eating like I would go visit my friend's house during the week and notice that they're eating like American food and not like eating rice and soups and jollof rice and all of this other different foods and stuff that I would be eating on a daily basis. But then on the flip side of that, like we also kind of, ate our American foods. Like we ate McDonald's, we ate Chick-fil-A, we ate Burger King and all of that fun stuff. But it was also just a lot of like eating the foods we eat. And then also my mom, I love my mom, but my girl likes to show off. She is a fancy lady. And she would always wear like traditional African clothing when we go to parties, like not just like, regular dresses or something. She would wear beautiful clothings and like just opulent like outfits that you don't really see here in America. And it's more so traditional like African cultures and African prints. But I think the first time I ever really thought about the fact that my parents like immigrated here was I think in third grade. And that was because, and I say this specifically because we had to do a project like a family tree project, and I had to talk about like where your family's from. And I would see like a lot of my classmates, like their parents, their grandparents, their great grandparents, they were like already living here. And I'm not. I'm like the first in my family born here, or at least between my parents, I was the first one born here. So kind of seeing that difference there, and then just kind of even embracing it even more and I'm sure your family's the same way, but like we have a lot of like sayings and traditions and like a lot. So like even like those little things like that, like knowing who you are, knowing where you come from, like that's something that my dad always really instilled in me from when I was a child all the way up, even till now, he's not here with us today. So I kind of like throughout my life, I've kind of always known that I was an immigrant. And not I am an immigrant, but I'm the daughter of immigrants. And also even kind of understanding it from like a race perspective. And, again, this is all just kind of depending on who you talk to, but there's like, if you're Caribbean Americans, you come from the islands, and then there's Black Americans, right? Like Black people who their ancestry is from here, slave times and all of that stuff. But yeah, so kind of even seeing those distinctions too, like having, like I had my Black African American friends, but then I also had like my African friends, like my African cousins and all of that stuff, so there's a lot of overlap there, but you can also kind of see those distinct differences, like when at it from a race perspective and even from a cultural perspective too. So
did you feel generally accepted as a child, being a kid of immigrant, in school, in your community, aside from, your family and your cousins, but would you say that you felt generally accepted, or were there any challenges where it made you feel drastically different from people around you?
I would say for the most part, it was pretty good, like I had my friends growing up, like even in like the neighborhood that I grew up in, like I think it was like for the most part pretty accepted. I didn't really have any too big of issues. There's always just childhood issues that every kid has. And also just, when you grow up, kids can sometimes be extra. They can be mean, and they have all these little things like, oh, you're African, I know you guys are living in huts and and all that. And I think that's kind of just something that you kind of have as if you are an immigrant, no matter where you're from, whether it's Europe or Asia or Africa or Latin America, wherever you hail from. So again, you kind of notice those differences there too. But I think sometimes I'd be a little bashful bringing my lunch to school because I know it'd be like fried fish and rice. And like, the average 10-year-old isn't eating fried fish and rice and stew, but I am. Or even sometimes the way I did my hair too. Like a lot of girls might have had their hair one way, but I knew my mom would do it the old African with the string and just wrap it with the string. And I'd be a little like, I don't necessarily want to wear this hair because everyone else doesn't do this, So, there were little things that I was embarrassed about just because, you want to kind of fit in and be like how everyone else is. That was definitely when I was younger, but I would definitely say that like as I grew older, especially like middle school and high school and even college, I started to embrace that more, like even little things like little bracelet that I wear every day, and like it never comes off. It's an African bracelet. So, you know, it's just like little things like that. So
A lot of immigrants that I speak with, a lot of children of immigrants, they can relate to an experience of having different discipline at home compared to typical American kids. So I wanted to touch on that too. What was it like being disciplined by immigrant parents, and were there any things that you wish were different, or now looking back, are you glad that you had some of the more, maybe I'm assuming more strict discipline at home? Talk a little bit about that.
yeah, so I had old parents and they were also strict old parents. So there was no like, Mom, can I go doing this, that? No, you had to ask at least 3 business days ahead. You had to have a plan. First of all, there was no talking back. That's number one, right? Like sometimes I see these kids and they're like yelling at their parents. I was like, if I ever do that, my mother would choke me. She would take my whole existence, right? Even little things, like even if I wanted to go to a friend's house, like it wasn't just, can I go to a friend's house? It was my dad had to talk to their parents and they had to conversate first. And there was a drop off, there was a pickup time. Like, I think even when I wanted to have like my first sleepover, like I know my mom was definitely a lot more lenient than my dad was. Like having my first sleepover at a friend's house was like a whole thing. It was like a 2-week process. I'm glad my parents were the way they were, because the way they were with me is the reason why I am the way I am now. And I even think about the fact, it's actually a really funny story. So when I was in Greece many, many moons ago, before the pandemic started, I remember just like, it was like midnight and I was just walking around by myself, and there's this in Greece, in Athens specifically, there's like this place, it's their parliament. And in front of the parliament, they have like these guards that just like stand there and they like move very, very, very slowly. And I love watching it. And I remember just standing there at midnight in the dark by myself, like, man, I'm in Athens right now. I paid for this trip by myself. And I think the reason why I was able to do that was because my parents were strict with me and also made me get good grades. And the biggest thing I noticed was that the biggest difference I noticed between my friends and I is that a lot of my friends got allowances. I did not get an allowance. Allowance was not a thing. Right. The allowance was me living there for free, like over my head. And it's even funnier too. My coworker, I was talking with her like on Wednesday, I think. She was like, my parents used to give me $20 for each A that I got. And I was like, oh, it must have been this. I didn't have that. I had to get not getting an A was not an option, because if I did it, then I knew my dad was going to be calling my school to wonder why I wasn't getting good grades. So I would definitely say that my parents were uber strict, but I'm glad they were uber strict because, again, I mean, I would have wished for a little bit more slack, of course. I mean, you know, you don't want to be, but the way they taught me and brought me up is the reason why I am the way I am today. And I'm grateful for that. And I mean, being that strict, I think kind of also taught me a little bit of independence and like being able to live on my own, do things on my own, make my own decisions. And I'm not sure if that's just the thing of only child syndrome or if that's just the way my parents brought me up. I'm sure it's a little bit of both.
Do you think that there are things that others just didn't seem to understand growing up because they didn't have the same experience as you?
Yeah, I think, and I will say, sometimes even I don't even get this, but like in our family, you want to do anything, it has to be blessed. You want to get married, has to be blessed. You have a baby, blessed. Children, starting a school, doing literally anything, it has to be blessed by your family. So I think that was probably, even for me, that's like the biggest thing is just like, I mean, I know my mom, like, she does this still to this day. Like, if there's something big about to happen, they'll do sacrifice. Sacrifice, it means like you get a cow, you kill it, it's blessed and everything. And then whatever that's there goes to the whole village and stuff, right? So that's definitely a big one. I remember telling my friends that, and I remember trying to explain something that I had no idea really how to explain. And to this day, still don't know not much how to explain. But yeah, I think that was definitely the biggest one that I remember. What else? The African parties, always going to those on like a random Thursday night, as if I didn't have school the next day. And I think that's really, really it. I mean, my parents kind of they raised me in an African home, right? So they definitely raised me to know my traditions, know where I come from, to my family, but they also raised me as like an American child as well. Because I think one of the things that happens whenever anyone moves to America is that they keep themselves who they are, but they also really try to embrace that American lifestyle and culture and everything. So I kind of have the best of both worlds with that. So it's like I had my African upbringing, but I also had that like, let's go to Disney World. Let's go to, let's go to Washington, D.C. and get monuments, So
yeah. Speaking of traditions and like celebrations and stuff, are there any other ones that maybe you celebrated that other typically Americans don't, or vice versa? Were there any American celebrations that your family was just like, we're not gonna celebrate it just because you either don't like care for it or it's just not something you agree with?
So Halloween. And I noticed this in a lot of immigrant households, is that a lot of immigrants celebrate Halloween. My family didn't. Well, my family did. They let me celebrate it because it was just for the fun of it for me, Halloween. But like the religious aspect of it, my parents thought I was just being a witch. And when I say a witch, I don't mean as in like a witch as in like a cartoon witch. I mean like a literal voodoo style witch. Like they saw it as like an evil thing and not just fun holiday. I will say Christmas too. Like Santa Claus does not exist. Like I knew Santa Claus did not exist from a very early age. Because for us, Christmas wasn't like the commercialized thing that it is now. It's like a religious holiday. So like, going to church on Christmas Eve, Christmas morning, or same thing with Easter. Like we're Episcopalian, so it wasn't like the Easter bunny. It was Jesus rising on the third day. I knew the commercialism of it, like, like I said, the Easter bunny and all of that fun stuff. But like in our household, it wasn't like we're going on an Easter egg hunt, like we like I would do that at school. But like when I was at home, it was just like, okay, this is like a religious holiday.
Yeah, no, I agree. I didn't grow up here, so it was a little bit different, but very similarly, like right now, even as an adult, I don't have like that magical or festive feeling about certain holidays because I just didn't grow up caring about them. It just wasn't a part of my life in Russia, so I was just like, it's just a day, but it's not the same as, for the typical American families. And I think the topic of mental health does come up a lot in these interviews, or just in general when I talk to my international folk. Was it like less of an open conversation in your family upbringing, or was it about the same?
Yeah, and I'm not really sure how to attribute this to my parents were just older. Dad, I love my dad, God rest his soul. My dad did not believe children had stress because he said, what can you be stressed about as an American child? So like concept of like stress did not exist to him. My mom, on the other hand, was a little bit more better about it, but that just might be because she worked in healthcare. Like my mom was a nurse. In terms of mental health, it's definitely very hush hush. At least, and I don't even want to necessarily say for all Africans, but at least in my family, mental health is not really talked about. And it's not really like, it's like, oh, I don't even know how to say it, but it's like, it's almost as if there's like some demon over you instead of the fact that's like, no, I have a mental health issue, and again, that's just like an old way of understanding health and understanding that, like, and I even sometimes here in America too, sometimes like, a lot of people, older generations, it's like, oh, you got a therapy, oh, she's crazy. But like, I feel like with our generation now, it's like, if you don't have a therapist, that's like, oh, is there something wrong with you that you don't have one? You didn't really talk about that stuff. Like if you're sad or something, if you're having a bad day, yeah, they'll ask you about it, like what's wrong, but it's not like a feel goody. I'd say like if you are sad, it's just more of a, okay, figure it out. Why are you sad? Let's fix it.
Yeah.
Let's sit here and be sad. Like, you're in America. What are you being sad about? So I would definitely say that mental health in foreign countries outside the United States, outside westernized countries, has a long way to go, mainly because a lot of people just, one, don't recognize it. And those that do recognize it don't think that there's anything wrong with you. They just think that there is some witch on you, like there was some evil demon happening to you. Blessedly, I didn't necessarily have any like mental health issues, like having anxiety or depression or anything. But I think if I did have some mental health issues, I think my parents would try their best to get me the help that I needed. But I know there would be a lot of like, are you sure that there's something wrong with you, or you just sad? Like, you know, it's just as if it's like, because you grew up here and because everyone thinks that life is so magical. What problems could you have, you know? And I feel like that's kind of also just almost brings it back to the strictness of my parents when I was even in college and grad school. It was like, what do you mean you're not getting good grades? Or if I'm like, oh, I'm having a bad day. Okay, you're having a bad day, but what does that have to do with your grades? Why aren't you like not getting all that? It kind of plays a part into the strictness of it. And then also like that, you have to go to school, get good grades because your parents didn't come here for you to not make money and be rich. I have to embrace capitalism. My parents did not immigrate here for me to not make money.
So lastly, before we, finish this interview, I wanted to kind of just ask you for some words of wisdom, words of advice for people that are watching this channel.
Definitely patience. If you're going through the whole immigration process, this is the best channel to figure out life in existence, because literally when I was filling out my I-130, I was watching your video and filling it out at the same time. Definitely be patient. It's a long process. Actually, it's not even that it's a long process. It's a time-consuming process, because it's realistically, at least on our side, it's like relatively three steps, but it's a long time between each step. So definitely be patient. And if you are an immigrant currently living here, if you're the child of immigrants, embrace who you are, embrace your culture. That's kind of what makes you stand out. Always visit home when you can, and don't forget where you come from.